President Donald Trump is quite literally having a meltdown. At least that's what American media is reporting. This after the US Supreme Court, predominantly a conservative court, struck down Donald Trump's pet project, tariffs. There won't be too many people around the world feeling any sympathy or solidarity for Trump in this moment. For India in particular, there are interesting questions. Having just completed an interim trade agreement with the United States of America, with the tariffs struck down and Trump announcing a global levy, a flat rate of 10% for countries across the world, will the trade agreement be renegotiated, with some of the pressure at least now gone? The government of India says it is closely studying the developments. That's the only official response from the Commerce Ministry so far. Meanwhile, Trump continued to insist that nothing has changed, when in fact, actually, everything has. I'm Barkadat, you're with the Mojo Story. On the program today, we will be looking at the larger implications of the US Supreme Court decision to strike down Donald Trump's pet projects, the tariffs that he slapped on different countries across the world. India too has been a victim of this weaponization of tariffs, and now these tariffs are gone. Trump, in a rambling press conference that some Indians would have seen at midnight, continued to insist that nothing had changed. But in fact, the US Supreme Court has ruled that Trump does not have emergency powers to impose the tariffs in the way that he has. Trump announced a 10% levy on countries around the world, but there are some questions as to whether this too will basically lapse in about 150 days. The questions are many, the answers are confusing, but this man that you see on your screen, an Indian American, Neal Katyal, is at least one of those responsible for taking Trump's tariffs down. And as a son of immigrants, as he himself referenced after the victory, the legal victory, well, the irony was clear. The MAGA crowd has been anti-immigrant, and here a son of an immigrant had his moment of victory in basically ensuring that these tariffs are now history, or are they? Well, let's find out from our experts today on how to understand what has happened. I want to bring up my guest today. If we can bring up our guest now. Joining me now is Prasad Duvuri. Prasad Duvuri is an entrepreneur. He is somebody who spends time between India and the United States of America and is directly actually impacted as an entrepreneur with what happens in this tariff regime. So welcome to the program. Joining us from the US today is Chidanand Rajghata with an excellent column out of the Times of India, trying to make sense of it all. Chidanand, always a great pleasure to have you with us. And of course, finally, adding his years of experience to this conversation, Ambassador Dilip Sinha, a veteran diplomat. Now, I want to start, before I get first comments from all of you, by playing out the complete chaos that Trump actually created with his press conference. Because at his press conference, he continued to insist that everything would be just the same, including the tariffs on India. When in fact, later, media reporting, quoting officials in the same Trump administration, made it clear that Trump's tariffs are now history. The 10% tariffs, yes, that he's announced, those are there. But these individually applied tariffs to different countries, those are gone. Take a look at the two contradictions coming out of the Trump administration.
On the trade deal, which is the framework which is to be signed with India sometime soon, will that stand now?
Yeah,
and on the decision,
changes.
Nothing changes?
No, nothing changes. They'll be paying tariffs, and we will not be paying tariffs. Our deal with India is they pay tariffs. This is a reversal from what it used to be, as you know. India, I think Prime Minister Modi is a great gentleman, a great man, actually, but he was much smarter than the people that he was against in terms of the United States. He was ripping us off in India. So we made a deal with India, and it's a fair deal now, and we are not paying tariffs to them, and they are paying tariffs. We did a little flip.
A number of countries and regions around the world came to trade agreements with the United States. A lot of those trade agreements set tariff rates that were higher than 10%. So what happens to those countries who already came to the table, already negotiated a trade agreement with the United States? Well, this White House official just confirming for me a short time ago that all of those agreements are now reset to 10% under this new tariff rate once it goes through. So the European Union, which was at 15%, 15%, now will be at 10. Japan was at 15%, now at 10. India was at 18, now at 10. South Korea was at 15, now at 10. And Vietnam will be the big winner here. They were at 20% under their trade agreement with the United States. They also come down to 10% under this new tariff that the president is imposing as of today. So I think that's an important nuance that a lot of people were trying to figure out over the past couple of hours, Mike.
On the trade deal, which is the framework which is to be signed
Okay,
with
let's come
India,
out of
sometime
let's
soon.
come out of
Will
this. We just heard this. Let's come out of that. Yeah. All right, Chidanand, let me start with you. So Trump says nothing has changed, and yet, as you know, is clear, everything has. What's going on? The reporting that we just heard on CNBC says that every trade agreement automatically stands reset at 10%. Is that the case? And Trump is having a meltdown. Let me ask you the political question, which is a more interesting question than even the tariff question. Is this the beginning of the end of Trump's great hold over American conservative imagination? Can't he? Chidana, just unmute yourself at your end, please. Yeah. Can you unmute yourself? Okay, I can't hear you, so let me get Ambassador Sinha to come in for first. Yeah, there you are. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So first on the tariff question, yeah, absolutely. Nothing has changed and everything has changed, but that's what's new about it. Okay, this is the Trump era. What he says in the morning may not be true in the evening, may not be true, the next day. So people are still, searching their way through this. But it looks like, all the trade agreements looks like they are going to be canned. And anything that was imposed under IEEPA, which is essentially what the Supreme Court struck down, is now in the dustbin. And he's announced a new 10% tariff. So that's what sort of kicks in almost immediately. It's valid for 150 days, but then they can pause for 15 minutes and renew it for another 150 days. Anything can happen with this administration. It's very, very hard to anticipate. But yeah, one thing is certain. He's not going to take this lying down. That would be very un-Trump-like, and he's going to come swinging back. There are various other provisions they can use. It involves, he can't do it with just an executive order or executive decree. It involves working, with the bureaucracy, it has to be an administrative move. But they have it ready, and so expect to see tariffs return. Maybe not on the scale.
Really? You're saying Trump's tariffs or the weaponization of tariffs is not history with this verdict? This could still come back?
Not at all. It's an article of faith with him. He's not going to back down. Are you kidding? Look at the language he used against the Supreme Court. I've never heard this kind of vituperative language. The epithets that he used, calling them, literally, he called the Supreme Court, the six justices who ruled against it, he literally called them traitors. He said they're disloyal. It is incredible. In any other country, there would have been contempt. But this is Trump, and he gets away with it. Yeah. So the tariff will come right back in one form or the other. It may not be, as high, but definitely. And then they'll pick and choose because they have other instruments. Like I said, the 10% is under Section 122. There's 232. There are trade dispute mechanisms. All that involves administrative and bureaucratic sort of pathways, not just a signed executive order like he did with IEEPA. But I don't for a moment think that this is done yet. And as for your political question, definitely this is a weakening. This is, this is a weakening. Is heading into the midterm polls. In fact, the 10% that he's announced is good for 150 days. And towards the end of that will be right around the time that the midterm polls are going to happen. And already you're beginning to see cracks in the Republican coalition. There were 6 Republican congressmen who actually voted, who defied Trump, on the Canada tariff question. So you're starting to see cracks. You're also starting to see a little bit of uncertainty. And he did not help it with his epic meltdown yesterday. It was monumental. The language that he used, the way he lashed out.
And he basically said that he had the power to destroy anything he wanted to.
Right. Yeah. And he said he could actually destroy that he could destroy countries with executive order, but he can't impose tariffs. But that the IEPA Act does not even mention the word tariffs. Actually, he can do other things with that. He could have imposed sanctions if he wants. So
Yeah.
he's correct in that sense. But to come back politically, he's weakened significantly. It's actually the first major defeat that the Supreme Court has dealt. I think there are at least 25 other cases where the Supreme Court has actually sided with him. And many people thought this is an ideologically driven Supreme Court. 6-3 conservatives will back him here too, but there were 3 conservative justices who went against it. And for a change, I think for the first time, they actually looked at it through a constitutional and institutional lens rather than ideological lens. So in one sense, the dam is broken. The feeling that the Supreme Court will back him, whatever he does, that myth has been busted. So there may be other cases. And in fact, even with the new tariffs, I mean, now there is a precedent that, they will be challenged all over again, all over the place. Right? For instance, right now, the big question is refunds. How do they refund? Who do they refund? And how will it work?
And I was watching some American television in the middle of my night, and nobody had that question. Every TV anchor was asking their colleagues, so will countries get their money back? What happens? Nobody knew the answer to that one. But before I come to Ambassador Sinha and Prasad for the, how might India respond, Chidanand referenced Trump's epic meltdown, just giving you a sense of it, because a lot of Indians were sleeping when this press conference took place. This is Trump, like being, for lack of a better word, and the most polite word I can use is unhinged. Take a look.
Can't charge $1. I would have used 1 penny, but we don't make the pennies anymore. We save money. Can't charge $1 to any country under IEPA. Not $1. I assume to protect other countries. This must have been done to protect those other countries, certainly not the United States of America, which they should be interested in protecting. That's what they're supposed to be protecting. But I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country. I'm even allowed to impose a foreign country destroying embargo. I can embargo. I can do anything I want, but I can't charge $1. Because that's not what it says. And that's not the way it even reads. I can do anything I want to do to them, but I can't charge any money. So I'm allowed to destroy the country, but I can't charge them a little fee. I could give them a little 2-cent fee, but I cannot charge under any circumstances. I cannot charge them anything.
I mean, he sounds like he's about to cry, basically. I don't know. It is so difficult to actually remain neutral of any, there's no neutrality possible in a Trumpian age, because it is bizarre, it is hilarious, it is tragic, it is mockery, it is everything. Ambassador Sinha, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think for India, the question is, does the interim trade agreement stand reset at 10%? Should India be renegotiating? It is after an interim trade agreement. Suddenly it becomes easier to say, no, we're not going to spend those, $500 million. We're not going to spend $1 billion, rather. We're not going to spend that money anyway. We were not bound to spend it. There are those in the opposition who are saying, oh, you could have waited this out. Maybe you wouldn't have had to sign it at all. So how do you see it?
Well, it's just my understanding, and I insist that it's my understanding because the picture is hardly clear to anybody, least of all to somebody in India, that what has been struck down by the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, are the measures taken by Trump, as Chidanand said, under the IEPA, which is the Emergency Powers Act, in which he had imposed differential tariffs on different countries. Now, with those impositions, it was incumbent upon India, which had faced 50% tariff, to try and negotiate like all other countries in the world, to try and see if it could be cut down. And I must give credit to our negotiators that they were able to bring it down from 50 to 18. Now, with the Supreme Court ruling, those agreements are all removed, and there is the flat 10% tariff that he has imposed under another set of powers that he has. I think this is the 1974 Act, which is a time-bound provision. So it's for 150 days, obviously for emergency situations to protect the US economy. So he's imposed a 10% tariff across the board. Now, in this situation, there's nothing to negotiate for India because it's a tariff that's been imposed across the board, not everybody. At the same time, I believe the 50% tariff that it imposed on certain products like steel, aluminum, and copper, I think they still remain. But then again, those are also across the board, they're enforced in all countries. So what has been removed or struck down by the Supreme Court is this differential thing of UK is so much, India is so much, China is so much. That has been struck down, and which means that he no longer has the capacity to negotiate with each country and bully them into these agreements like you must buy so much or you must invest so much in the US economy. So I think India should, at the moment, of course, just sit back and wait and watch the situation in the US and see what other countries are doing, what the US itself does, because you never know, tomorrow he might find some other act that empowers him to take some more measures, because the acts and constitutions do give the executive some extraordinary powers under emergency situations. The problem was that Trump was trying to misuse these across the board, not only for some countries like they do, for example, in the case of Iran or North Korea or Cuba, but he was imposing it on all fronts, including Canada of all countries. And it's a good thing that the US institutions are now striking back. They're coming back into their own. The feeling that some people had developed that the Supreme Court was completely supine, that has been removed. And the Congress also seems to be coming up. And that is a good sign that, after all, it is the rule of law in the US that attracted all other countries to the US and made the US the greatest economic power in the world. And that, I think, should be restored if these institutions start playing their role constitutionally.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I mean, even seeing sort of the Congress being able to push the administration on releasing the Epstein files, the US Supreme Court now, coming in with this intervention. I think Trump is just shell-shocked because he saw it as a court that leaned in its favor. Quite clearly, it's predominantly a conservative court. Prasad, as an entrepreneur who's been studying this very closely, what does this all mean?
Firstly, what the Supreme Court has done is that they have taken away the powers of the president to impose tariffs or sign any agreements using the IEEPA.
Yeah.
That is the crux of this entire problem. So effectively, to borrow a line from Mr. Peter Navarro, the Supreme Court has denied Trump the designation of being the Maharaja of tariffs. Okay, so that's what has happened. Now, all the trade agreements, the rates, the tariff rates negotiated with each country, I went and looked at all of those executive orders which were issued after the agreement was signed between the two countries, between the US and Korea, between the US and Japan. I looked at 6 of them of the last 10 months. Each of them had a reference that the president is signing this trade agreement with Japan under IEEPA. So now, with the Supreme Court taking away that power, saying you are not allowed to sign these tariffs, impose these tariffs on these countries using the IEEPA, all of these trade agreements that he has signed are all invalid. And therefore, none of those tariffs hold.
Hang on. Yes. I have a question. You are saying that it isn't that the trade agreement, including India's own, is reset to the new 10%. You're saying that the trade agreement is null and void. It basically there's no trade agreement anymore.
Correct. So let's go step by step. Step number 1, all of the tariff-related work that has happened these last 10 months, from Liberation Day to Liberation Day. Yesterday was also a Liberation Day for all the countries. right? We started with Liberation Day for the US, and yesterday happened to be Liberation Day for all countries. So everything in between, all the work done, has now come to a knot. It's all gone. Not only that, let me go ahead and say this. If India finally inked the details of the terms of the agreement that the Prime Minister and the President agreed to last week, and they made those announcements, followed by the White House press release or whatever, if those got inked on 15th March, they would also become invalid. What it means is that tomorrow, if India has to sit with the Trump administration to sign, to make this agreement into reality, Trump cannot do that with India. Forget what India wants to do. Trump cannot do that because Trump doesn't have that authority anymore. I hope I'm clear.
I mean, I guess what I want to understand is, this interim agreement, does it exist or it doesn't exist?
No, it's gone. Firstly, there is no interim agreement. It was an announcement leading towards an agreement. The actual agreement was not signed. It was supposed to be.
I think Chidanand has an interjection. Can we get Chidanand in briefly? Prasad, I'll let you complete your point after that. You do?
Yeah. No, I was just saying that it's actually a framework for an interim agreement. It's not even an interim agreement. So
exactly.
There's a long way to go.
Yes. Okay. So the framework would have led to an interim agreement probably in March. And let's just assume that the Supreme Court decision didn't come and the agreement actually happened. Then from the United States, the president would issue an executive order with the details of this agreement, in which it would say the powers rested upon the president of the United States. He hereby does this, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Using the IEEPA.
So as of today, and I want Ambassador Sinha to come in also. As of today, according to you, trade agreement gone. Interim trade agreement framework
with everybody, with the whole world.
With everybody. Yeah. But we will be paying this 10% tariff as are all other countries.
Let me clarify that. The 10% tariff under Section 122 is a tariff that the president does not require authorization from anybody, can impose the 10% tariff blanket on all countries for a period of 150 days. Right. The max he can impose is 15%. He was generous enough yesterday, in spite of having a meltdown, to only impose 10%, although he was allowed 15%.
But he can renew it.
No. Let's not go that far. I'm saying on Monday, there could be the same learning resources group could sue the president, saying that Section 122 requires you to prove that there is a balance of payments problem in the US, which is why you need to use this 10% tariff for the 150 days. So even the Section 122 could be sued, and he has to then prove that there is a balance of payments crisis.
Okay, my head is really spinning from all this. I think the mota baat, Ambassador Sinha, do you agree that the interim, I wrote in the morning, we should renegotiate this agreement. I think what I'm hearing from Prasad and Chidanand is what renegotiate. The agreement doesn't exist. It anyway hadn't been operationalized. And so therefore it's kind of no longer valid. Do you agree with that reading? A. B, what happens to the business of Russian oil? Because, is that now a non-issue? Because if Trump's tariffs are gone, and the penalty, which he then withdrew after talks, was for purchase of Russian oil. And he kept saying India has said it will no longer buy Russian oil, etc., etc. None of that seems to apply. And I know Chidanand says that the tariffs can still make a backdoor entry. He'll find another way to bring them in. But as of now, is this interim trade agreement infructuous? Is it gone? B, is Russian oil now a non-issue?
Well, the first part is correct. I think the agreement is gone. It's been struck down by the Supreme Court. But the second part, whether India has made any commitment not to buy Russian oil, and if it feels that even if it had made a commitment, now that the agreement is gone, there is no need to follow that commitment, one cannot rule out the possibility of some other action being taken by the US president in the name of national security against India. If he were to feel that, yes, national security is threatened, and I'm sure he has a whole bouquet of powers that he can fall back upon, specifically for the buying of Russian oil. He can invoke national security. There's a war going on in Ukraine. Now, if he does that, then the only option open for India would be to go to the Supreme Court in the US and try and explain that, look, why should only India be penalized? Why not China, for example, or any other country that's buying oil from Russia? Now, in that case, it will be a prolonged process. It might take another 1 year, and our exports will suffer in that period. Now, on the first point of the 10% tariff that he's authorized to impose on account of balance of payments problem, he can actually cite the fact that there is a huge trade deficit. In fact, last year, despite all his tariffs, the US trade deficit went up to $1.24 trillion. It was a record.
Yeah.
So whatever measures he was taking were not having the effect that was intended by him.
Chidanand, I want to just bring in another character into this conversation, Neal Katyal. It's interesting. He's of Indian origin. He just had one word after this verdict, victory. He's been all over American media since then, very much the toast of town, represented small businesses in this case against Trump. The irony kind of writes itself. Tell us a little bit about his role in his story.
Katyal is a very well-known attorney. He was the additional Solicitor General in the Obama administration, has argued many cases before the Supreme Court, more than 50 cases, which is actually quite significant for a person of such young age. He's in his 50s, and he's won many of them. And in this case, actually, he initially represented the Liberty Justice Center, which was the front organization for about, I think, 4 or 5 plaintiffs. And the eventual case that the Supreme Court took up were actually the plaintiffs were Learning Resources, which is a Chicago-based toy company, which was actually represented by another Indian-American attorney named Pratik Shah, who was supposed to argue that case. And then when the Supreme Court consolidated all the cases, Pratik and Neal had a coin toss about who'd who'd argue before the Supreme Court, and Neal won the coin toss. And that's how he got to argue. And it's a delicious irony that it required an immigrant, son of immigrants, to argue. Yeah. Very distinguished. He's also been a consistent Trump critic. He's been a thorn in the MAGA side over many years. And it's a spectacular victory. It's very interesting that Trump, the way he lashed out at the Supreme Court being influenced by foreign forces, globalists. I thought there was an oblique reference to Neal Katyal, who's in pain for the Trump side, and also the company Learning Resources. It's a family-owned business. It's a Chicago-based toy company which actually does business with India. They buy a lot of special tools, toys, wooden toys, yoga ball and such like from, I think, Fun School in India and a couple of other Indian companies. So definitely there was a very significant Indian angle to this. It's very striking. And Katyal himself acknowledged his immigrant roots when he spoke. Actually, I think this morning he said,
as a son, he said, as a son of immigrants,
to go up before the.
Can I ask you something before I come to Prasad? Do you believe that this, what is going to be the response to this in the MAGA base? Is it going to lead to a kind of greater social backlash of the kind that we've been hearing against Indian Americans and other immigrant communities, or is it too technical for anybody to get their heads around?
It is. The details are too technical, but the broad, thing is that the whole idea, the whole tariff thing has increased prices, and this myth that Trump kept repeating all the time that some other countries are paying tariffs, that we are raking in money by the billions and billions. Not true. And that is finally filtering down to MAGA, because in this case, Learning Resource actually explicitly pointed out that they had to pay $14 million in tariffs. This is a Chicago company which had to pay $14 million in tariffs. It bankrupted them almost, and they passed on the cost to the customer. So my kids who buy toys from Learning Resources, eventually we had to pay the extra cost. It was not, Fun School or some Indian company which was paying it. So in many cases, there are cases, and I think Prasad will mention this, where the importer also happens to be an affiliate of the Indian entity, and therefore, pays the tariff. But in many cases, it's the American importer who pays the tariff and passes it on to the consumer. And so the prices have gone up in many instances, and he keeps repeating that, no, we are raking in billions and billions. So that reality, I think, is sinking in. And frankly, I think the MAGA base is also starting to, tire of this, because the great manufacturing boom, which was supposed to happen, not happening. Figures don't show. And as Ambassador mentioned, the deficits are going up. And I have a feeling that, this is a moment of reckoning, and you're starting to, the polls he's been tanking at the polls for several weeks now. But this was a moment, this was a defining moment. And and the great thing is that the Supreme Court also has redeemed itself. I think that is something that will resonate with a large section of,
Absolutely.
It's a Supreme Court that finally, came out of Trump's shadow and asserted itself. And mind you, it hasn't said that Trump doesn't have the power to tariff. The ruling is actually explicit. He doesn't have the power to tariff under IEEPA, right? He has several other instruments. The logical thing would have been, and he could have done this right at the get-go when he came in January, he could have legislated it through Congress, where he had a majority in the Congress, in the House of Reps, in Senate, he had control of the White House. And any president, the normal thing would have been to go through legislate, get your flock together and pass a law. And because the powers of taxation and tariff is vested in the Congress. But hey, you know what? Emperor Donald, he wanted to be king. In his mind, it's an imperial presidency. The president can do whatever he wants, and he still believes that I can do whatever I want. But he's finding out now that he has to go through, the bureaucratic and administrative process to impose.
So before I give Ambassador Dilip the concluding remark, Prasad, I want you to come in. You explained quite lucidly the trade agreement for India and everybody else is actually now null and void. But Chidanand continues to feel that tariffs could come in another way. And Ambassador Sinha also says he could quote some other law. Would he, in all other circumstances, have to go through Congress? And if he does go through Congress, what is the mood? Because so far he's had complete domination of the Republican Party, except for some one lone Republican who forced his hand along with Ro Khanna on the Epstein files. He's had complete domination of the Republican, at least public articulation. Is that shifting? What happens next, according to you?
Well, first, let's come back to tariffs.
Yeah.
After this is what happened is when the tariffs were imposed, the importer in the US had to pay the tariffs to clear the consignment from the country where it came. So if I give my example, our shipment came from India into the US. We paid the 50% tariff to the US customs. Then the consignment was let in. Now we passed on the tariffs on our products to the American consumers. So if I sold something for a box of cookies was, let's say, $5.49, I made it $6. Now, after the strike down, I'm going to claim a refund.
Oh, you are?
I will. But it's not for me because I'm legitimately required to ask for a refund. I will.
I think Chidanand has something to say about your biscuits. 1 minute. Chidanand, can we bring you in? Once again. Can I unmute Chidanand, please?
The tariffs.
What?
Good luck with reclaiming, the tariff, because I think Trump himself said that it's going to be litigated for another 5 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
But that aside, let's say there is a refund process. I'm going to claim the refund. If let's say I get a refund of $400,000, I can't keep it with me. I have to take this $400,000 and give it off to Whole Foods, to Food Lion, to all the grocery chains who I invoiced, this additional money. I have to give it to them, and they can't keep the money. They have to trace back Barkha, who bought a box of cookies for $5.50, and give her the 25 cents back. You understand? That's why.
But kahan pe refund milega?
That's why I'm saying. That's why if you look at the 170-page judgment, Amy Coney Barrett has specifically said this is going to pose a huge burden on how are you going to refund all of these tariffs back. She has mentioned this in the agreement, this point. So it is a mess. So that being said, the most important thing you asked about is what's happening with the MAGA base. The MAGA base is actually tired of all of these promises made, but nothing actually fruitioning eventually into result. Epstein files, tariffs, thousands of companies coming in, creating millions of jobs. Here's the most important thing. He said we are collecting hundreds of billions of dollars. Well, guess how much of tariff was collected in this entire time? It was $165 billion of tariffs collected. So where is the hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs? It's only 165 billion collected. So that narrative itself falls flat on its face, that it's raking in a lot of money. And then the MAGA crowd, what I'm listening in on social media, the MAGA crowd is beginning to say, where are those hundreds of billions? Why are we only refunding 165 billion now because of this court striking it down? So it's all like much ado about nothing.
What a
so
mess. What a
it
mess,
is.
basically.
And then you have
yeah.
you have more than 12 Republican House members who are dead against tariffs. And this Supreme Court judgment is empowered them. So tariffs will not come back in. And one last point, Barkha, before I hand it back to you, the actual process of implementing these tariffs, as per US Constitution, is notification by the president to Congress 90 days prior in writing, intent to enter into negotiations before they begin. Then the negotiating objectives will be set by Congress and sent to the president and the US trade rep. The US trade rep then conduct the consultations with the country and must regularly meet with the House Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee to update them on the progress. The final text publication, once the deal is reached, the president has to publish the full text for the public and the Congress at least 60 days before signing it. And then Congress has to vote a up-down vote before the deal is signed by the president. This is the correct process. And basically, the Supreme Court judgment said, use that process if you want to charge tariffs.
Okay, so you said so, there are also conflicting figures on how much he collected. Some reports say 6 hours ago, we have a report that says he only collected 133 billion. But either way, the point is, where are these hundreds of billions that he says he collected?
He collected tariffs yesterday. Remember that. Even yesterday, while the Supreme Court. So the data has to come. Yeah.
Okay, fair. Okay, Ambassador Sinha, how should we be responding? How should we, as in our country, our government, be responding?
I think we should be looking at the longer term picture. Now, in the longer term picture, two things are important. One is that a persistent large deficit is not a good thing in any kind of trade. It does create resistance. It creates ill will, and people feel that the other country is taking advantage. It happens in the case of India's trade with China, where there is a lot of discomfort in India because of that high deficit. So we have to understand that in the age that we are entering, where WTO rules are no longer sacrosanct, that we have to ensure that the bilateral trade does not have very high disparity. And the other is, we must understand that our export basket has to improve. One of the things that we kept saying in the agreement was that we have kept our labor-intensive products safe, but the total market of these goods is very limited. And we are competing against Cambodia and Bangladesh, whereas countries like Vietnam are shooting ahead with manufactured goods exports. So we have to look at our basket of exports and move on to products which have an easier access in the Western market, because these are the products that have a bigger market. The total market for textile goods is very limited, both in the US and in the European Union, whereas the market for electronics, for machinery, that is the one that is open, and we should be planning for those rather than worrying about what Trump does today and tomorrow. These things will continue, but it is the longer term picture that we have to look at.
Fair enough. Just before we let you all go, Chidanand, since there's so much talk about the MAGA base, I mean, not that Joe Rogan has been quintessentially MAGA necessarily, but he's certainly right of the spectrum. And his comments on the Epstein files and how it's such a bad look for Donald Trump, I just want to ask if you see that becoming the next flashpoint. So far, Trump has been spared a political cost on it. We have the Clintons testifying, of course, Bill Clinton himself. As I said, I mean, Epstein is clearly ideology agnostic from the left to the right. They're all in there. How do you see that issue shaping up for him politically?
Yeah, I mean that's a dynamite, but essentially one of the conspiracy theory was all this tariffs things was meant to distract from the focus from.
And he might bomb Iran to change the headline.
Yeah, but it's not going away, and it's now become so muddled and muddied that it's hard to discern. I get a sense that once again it'll be something that people will get tired of. But I mean, there are relentless exposés. There are 3 million sort of pages of documents. People will keep digging out. But there's already a sense of fatigue that nobody is being held accountable. There have been no arrests. I mean, of course, there's Andrew in Britain who's in the dark, so to say. But all this is adding up, and when
Chidanand, it's a big contrast, right? In Europe. Whether it's the Norway royal family, whether it is Peter Mandelson, whether it is Andrew, there's actual costs to pay for anybody who's at least been linked to sexual abuse.
Absolutely.
In the US, there seem to be no consequences.
Yeah, under this under this dispensation, and it's very un-American actually. Remember, this is a country which did not hesitate to prosecute a vice president, for tax evasion. One time where a president had to resign after Watergate. So there is great accountability in this system. And, my guess is it will eventually come back. And, Joe Rogan increasingly sounds very disenchanted with this thing. And that's an important sign that there is a shifting sentiment in the MAGA base. And most of all, it's simply because of the cost of living issue, affordability issue. A lot of people, trust me, all the talk that, affordability is no more an issue, prices have come down, absolute poppycock. And people are, starting to express themselves. The MAGA base is starting to express themselves. And if this translates into, votes in the midterm election, which is why they're also trying to fiddle with the whole election process itself. So, I mean, it's all.
Well, lots of balls up in the air. I think I saw, if you could come out of this, Ambassador Sinha's hand go up. Yes, Ambassador Sinha, before we close.
Yeah, just one point. Chidan mentioned about the cleaning up. I hope the Epstein affair leads to a certain amount of cleaning up of the mess that the American system has been in. And I must point out that President Clinton got away with escaped very, very narrowly. I mean, his was a clear abuse of power as president, and he got away with it. And I think this decline today was set in motion at that time. And I hope the Americans are able to use this incident to clean up the kind of mess that they have brought themselves into and raise themselves to the level that countries in Europe certainly have. And I hope other countries also follow suit.
I think that's an excellent point. I think the way we look at Clinton-Lewinsky case today is so different, so much more informed than the conversation that took place, in the 90s. But yes, excellent point. I think a lot of dirt still to emerge. The MAGA base tiring, the tariff the tariff slap. I would just wonder what will Trump do next, because this is not a stable political leader, and anything can happen, as Chidanand told us in the beginning. So I think we're all going to be very busy tracking this, whether we want to or we don't want to. Thank you so much, Chidanand, Ambassador Sinha, and Prasad, and everybody have a great weekend. Thank you, and see you Monday. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.